This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning, but we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 24th of August, 2021, and I am 2J.
I am JM.
And I am Miss K. Again, in case you missed today's headlines, here they are. Daily Nation, Raila's big blow. The Standard, Uhuru's tough task in crafting Raila Oka deal. The Star, lead Raila Mount Kenya campaign, allies tell Uhuru. And finally, People Daily, Oka conditions for a Raila deal. I think I'll start us off today, and I'll start us off none of the headlines. In fact, yesterday, President Uhuru Kenyatta invited the editorial directors of the main media houses to have a conversation on the actions and omissions of the DP, the BBI Court of Appeal ruling, and other national issues. Two things mentioned by the president stuck out for me, and I think that they're worth repeating on this platform. The first is the collective amnesia of the Kenyan public, and the second is the propaganda around the BBI process. On the collective amnesia of the Kenyan public, the president said, and I agree with him, that people have unfortunately forgotten why we are attempting to address the issues of resources and representation through BBI. It is true, we have forgotten. We've forgotten about Kenyan, we've forgotten about secession, we have forgotten about post-election violence. Like the children of Israel, we would rather keep the two-man presidency and wander in the political wilderness for 40 years than deal with the underlying problem facing our nation. Now, on the propaganda around the BBI process, the president said that there is propaganda around BBI that has been built to poison the minds of the people, to deviate them from looking at the real facts. The complex political issues of our country have been inadequately simplified into an issue of us versus them, because that's an easy campaign platform. In the past, we have said that politics is war, and the first casualty in war is unfortunately truth. And it appears that in this instance, the truth has been sacrificed at the altar of short-term personal political gain. And unfortunately, I think this quote just sums up our situation. The Spanish philosopher George Santayana was quoted by Winston Churchill as saying, "Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it." And this is our unfortunate weakness as Kenyans.
Indeed. And I have another quote that is often said on this table, that it is better to have your enemy on the inside peeing out than on the outside peeing in. And in our view, that has been the president's dilemma in his relationship with William Ruto, at least for the better part of his final term. Where is this man better placed, and how to respond to this betrayal? And to Uhuru Kenyatta's credit, ever the statesman, he has put up with a lot of rubbish and still remained very gracious. But I think now the gloves are coming off. And this brings up the difference, I think, between dissent and disloyalty. So dissent speaks to a disagreement about ideas or doctrine, while disloyalty is about betrayal and the act of being unfaithful and two-faced. Dissent, I think, is encouraged. It ensures that different viewpoints are always represented. But disloyalty, this crosses into the realm of disrespect. And so we ask, Mr. Ruto, do you disagree with how Jubilee has led country? Or have you been unfaithful in the execution of your duties as the principal assistant to the president? You cannot have your cake and eat it too. The honorable thing to do is resign. What is Ruto saying to the people of Kenya when he uses government vehicles, operates using government resources, and lives in a government house? Yet he's willing to trash that very same government. And let us not forget about April of 1966, when Jaramogi penned his resignation letter. He wrote, and I quote, "Mr. President, you have not given any consideration to me as your number 2 in state matters. I have a conscience. And this, in fact, does prick me when I earn public money but do no job. I consider this a waste of public money, and I'm worried lest the future generation questions my sincerity when they would learn that I allowed myself to hold a sinecure position in the midst of poverty and misery in our country." Jaramogi was a lesson in humility. But what does it mean when your boss is asking you to resign? You've effectively been fired. William Ruto, you have officially been put on notice. And as history, it has provided you with a blueprint. Your open disloyalty must be called out and made an example of. And history means that you may actually be out of a job soon.
I think you're saying two things. Either he has no conscience that pricks him, or bottom up is not that you give the money to the people by resigning.
You pocket it yourself.
He's a most insincere man. Now, let me also talk about William Ruto. He's a function of terrain and velocity, as Professor Mutayanguni says. And if you change his terrain, he is finito. If you change his speed, he is also finished. Let me explain. In the discipline of warfare, both of these are fundamental principles. Terrain is about the lay of the land, and speed is about swiftness of action. Now, according to Sun Tzu in The Art of War, there are 6 kinds of terrain. The first is accessible ground, and this is ground which can be freely traversed by both sides. It's an open field, that kind of thing. The second, entangling ground, and this is ground which, once abandoned, is hard to reoccupy. Spaces like hills, forests, swamps, wetlands. Third is temporizing ground. Temporizing ground is ground where neither side will gain by making the first move. Fourth are the narrow passes. Narrow passes are dangerous if the ground above can be taken and the people below within those passageways showered from above with arrows. Fifth are steep heights. These are raised and sunny spots where you've got a good vantage point. Sixth and finally are positions which are at a great distance from the enemy. Now, if you're situated at a great distance from the enemy and the strength of the two armies is equal, what Sun Tzu says, it is not easy to provoke a battle, and fighting will be to your disadvantage. So the question begs, what terrain is William Ruto on right now? Now, William Ruto, I want to hypothesize, thinks that he has been occupying entangling ground, right? He's been in the forests, in the hills, in the valleys, which he's taken advantage of for the last 2 or so years. And from here, he has been doing the war of detachment, preaching bottoms-up economics, telling country about the hustler nation, pitting classes against each other, and so on. But in fact, he is in the narrow passes. And he is in the narrow passes on account of 3 things: having isolated himself from the major political elite, having made an enemy of his boss, and finally third, banking on Gama's voter base for the 2022 election. Now recall, the narrow passageway becomes dangerous when the ground above can be taken and the people below then showered from above, right? And this is precisely, I think, what will happen in the next 12 or so months. The elite will gang up on Ruto. The bureaucracy, which he has been lambasting from Karen, will turn on him. And finally, Gema will also abandon him for the devil they know rather than the angel that they don't. And so, William Ruto does not also have speed to his advantage. I talked about 2 things. Speed, he also doesn't have it. He doesn't have the machinery, right? He's banking on alleged Turkish fruit investors and people like Museveni in Uganda. Those are not people who can give him speed. But finally, also a word of note to the William Ruto camp. It is from a story that we usually give here at the Fort Hill School of Government. Not everybody who dumps on you is your enemy, and not everybody who pulls you out of dump is your friend. Now, the Ruto team, they think that they have an ally in the judiciary after Friday's ruling. The judiciary is playing its own game, motivated by its own objectives.
Couldn't agree more. We have a 3-part criteria that we use to judge the headlines for you. We ask ourselves 3 questions. Is the headline topical or speculative, repetitive or groundbreaking, and thoughtful, or just plain lazy? Raila's big blow. Uhuru's tough task in crafting Raila Oka deal. Lead Mount Kenya campaign. Allies tell Uhuru and Oka conditions for a Raila deal.
Just generally, I'm quite surprised that none of the headlines picked up what the president said last night. I thought that was quite
It's possible that we have just discovered that the news cycle ends before 9 o'clock.
Or
by that time
the media are indeed lazy and evil.
As we say, they're both.
Yeah.
So can we take the star then? Lead the Raila Mount Kenya campaign, allies tell Uhuru, for being the only prescriptive.
Yeah, I agree.
Headline.
If Uhuru could sell Ruto to Mount Kenya, I believe 100% he can sell Raila to the same.
There you have it, the star givers are winning headline. And now our final thought. But before we get there, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And now our final thought is a week that we've explored before and we thought we would do again. It's Assassinations Week 2.0. And this book today is inspired by Stalin's Agent, The Life and Death of Alexander Orlov by Boris Volodarsky. So Stalin's Agent is a biography of one of Stalin's most loyal and trusted henchmen during the Spanish Civil War, known as the alias Alexander Orlov. So Orlov entered the history of Soviet espionage primarily due to 3 reasons. First, he was credited with presiding over the shipment of over 500 tons, that's about 500,000 kilos, of Spanish gold reserve to Moscow in 1936. So this was essentially the entire of Spanish gold reserves that were shipped to the USSR and were effectively stripping the country of her assets. And all of this was in exchange for limited supplies of military equipment from the USSR. Second, in fear of being executed by his paranoid bosses, Orlov outmaneuvered Stalin's agents and defected to North America. On top of that, rather than leaving empty-handed, he took $68,000, which was the entire operational fund that he stole from the Soviet station in Spain. In addition, he also took $22,800 that he had claimed he had saved. And with this money, it was an equivalent of about $1.5 million today. Orlov lived quietly and laying low until 1953. The third thing he's known for is that same year when Stalin died, 1953, he again played his cards right, and he made a name for himself with the best-selling book, The Secret History of Stalin's Crimes, after which he became perhaps the best known of all Soviet defectors.
What a man.
But there is a twist in this Orlov story. General Alexander Orlov never actually existed. The man who was known as Orlov was in fact born Leba Feldman, and while he was actually a loyal servant of Stalin, he was never a general in the KGB. He never truly defected to the West after his flight from the USSR. He actually remained a loyal Soviet agent until his death. And this Orlov story has been accepted now largely at the invention of the KGB, and one perpetuated long after the Cold War. So after the publication of this book he wrote, The Secret History, Orlov was forced to come forward. And both the CIA and the FBI were so embarrassed by the revelation that this high-ranking spy had been living underground in the United States for 15 years without their knowledge. But interestingly, it's actually the life of people just like Orlov that inspired this Soviet-style espionage all the way from Stalin to Putin. And I guess the point here is, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I think the Soviets have gotten that espionage down to a science.
Yeah. Now, in the month of September 1936, Alexander Orlov was appointed NKVD liaison to the Spanish Republican Ministry of Interior. And the USSR had sent its soldiers here to fight against the fascist rebel force of General Francisco Franco. But it is also a place where anti-Stalinists, we're told by the author, allied to people like Leon Trotsky, took refuge, right? So in the end, Francisco Franco won the war and Spain became a fascist state. But while in Spain, Orlov was in charge of conducting warfare. As soon as he got there in his first month, he says he organized guerrilla warfare behind the nationalist lines. But what he's also best remembered for is a movement, as you said, Tujay, of Spain's gold reserves from Madrid to Moscow. And the Republican government, it is said, had agreed to use this hoard of bullion as an advance payment for Soviet military supplies. And the idea of sending gold to the Soviet Union came to, we're told in the book, came to this finance minister of Spain, Juan Negrin, right, who then consulted with its prime minister, Francisco Caballero. And they agreed the best way to secure Soviet assistance is to send the gold over there. So according to the authors, the reasons why they agreed on this arrangement is because the difficulties in selling gold to Britain at that time were quite significant. There were also uproars that gold sales in France, was causing all sorts of diplomatic furor. The need to keep international payments secretive at that point. But last not least, anticipating yet again more Soviet supplies. So it seemed like the environment at that time just wasn't friendly to anybody who was financing. It was like terrorist financing. So you had to find ways of quietly moving money to your precisely underground. So shipment was facilitated, and they were deposited, these gold bullions, in the Russian state bank, Gosbank, we're told. And it took 4 nights for truck convoys driven by Soviet tankmen to bring the 500 tons of gold from its hiding place in the mountains to the port of Cartagena. There, under the threat of German bombing raids, it was loaded on 4 different Russian steamers, all bound for Odessa, and they arrived in peace. And for his service, we're told, Orlov received the Order of Lenin. But in his book, Orlov claims that Stalin personally signed the telegram placing him in charge of this sensitive operation. But the author tells us that no trace of Stalin's telegram has ever been found. So far, for the obvious reason, this telegram just never existed.
Yeah.
And what is most interesting, finally, about this man, as you said, Tujay, was his ability to maneuver and survive the Great Purge of 1937. So in 1937, Stalin recalls a lot of these people that he had posted outside of Moscow back under the guise of, we need to meet, touch base, see what's happening. But he was doing a purge, right?
He killed them all.
He killed them all, yeah? So, but Orlov got wind of this, and before leaving Paris, Orlov left 2 letters for the Soviet ambassador. One for Stalin, and one for the NKVD chief, Yezhov. And he told them that he would reveal everything he knew about NKVD operations if any action was taken against him or his family. Now, in a 2-page attachment to those letters, Orlov listed the codenames of numerous illegals and moles operating in the West. He'd blow their cover. So the NKVD, presumably on orders from Stalin, did not try to locate him until the year 1969. So as you say, Tujay, this must have been really, really one of Stalin's most trusted confidants. By the time Stalin is not looking for you the world over, it means, you must really have dirt on him.
But this is part of the conversation that Ms. K and I had as we read the book. I think it was about 2 things. One, about the kernel of truth. I think it was found later on that many of the things Orlov said were not even found to be true. And second, how he was such a magnificent opportunist, right?
Yes. I love that he did that. In fact, I'll begin by saying that history is usually written by the victors. So with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, we all know who won the fight between those 2 ideological systems. But this time, the losers went on to write their story, the story of the spy wars, and the winners did not even notice. FBI files versus KGB documents, espionage, and sensational Cold War intelligence history and stories. But guess what? And this is what we're saying with 2J, it was all lies. The US intelligence felt blindsided, and the general public, including ourselves, bought it wholesale. The man known as Alexander Orlov never existed, and the real guy whose name was, I don't know if it's Lieber Felbin or Lev Lazarevich Nikolsky, was never a general in the KGB, never truly defected to the West, and remained a loyal Soviet agent until his death. The Orlov story was an invention of the KGB, and as you said, 2J, they perpetuated it and they brought it down to a science. We now believe the best spies are either Jews or Russian Jews, like this guy was. So the thing that struck me was the man himself, the non-existent Alexander Orlov, and in my view, he was the living personification of Sun Tzu's Tao of Paradox, which says, those who strategize use the Tao of Paradox. Thus, when able, they appear unable. When employed, they appear useless. When close, they appear distant. When distant, they appear close. They lure through advantages and take control through confusion. And I think that's what happened in the purge of 37, because there was confusion. He sent a letter and no one was willing to check it, and he just slid through. And the idea with the Tao of Paradox is to create a perceived reality that is not necessarily accurate in order to gain advantage. Those who had met Alexander Orlov described him as self-effacing, humble. He never spoke down to anyone. He had the ability to listen patiently to the other side. He was extremely intelligent, had immense character and integrity. Then here's the clincher. They never knew him to lie. Yet he was the master at appearing truthful when all he did was mislead and misinform. Using a kernel of truth, like we said, clothed in lies, Alexander Orlov made a fortune that he stole first from the Spanish. And my suspicion, personally, is that around the time when Stalin died, he was broke and he had to come up with something new. So he now sold his books, convincing the FBI and CIA of his genuineness, to the extent that they made him an advisor and that he wrote a number of official publications on Russian methods. And to top it off, the KGB eventually endorsed Orlov or Nikolsky and his self-serving lies by turning them into a disinformation operation. I mean, you can't help but reluctantly admire the guy's guts.
Oh yeah,
It was good.
He was a great liar.
He was real good. Anyway, today we had a winning headline from the Star, and I'd like to leave you with a quote. But before I say that, do not forget to find us on your TV screens. We're on Pan Free to Air, GoTV and Star Times. My quote is from Lyndon Johnson, and it's about politicians for telling me you're a politician without telling me. And he says, if you're in politics and you can't tell when you walk into a room who's for you and who's against you, then you're in the wrong line of work. This is advice maybe to William Ruto. Do have a great evening.